You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
And joining us now live here in studio is Maui Mayor Richard Bissen. Mayor, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining us here live.
Hi, aloha winala, kaua. Thank you.
Well, we'll look forward. We have a lot to talk about this afternoon about everything that's happening on Maui, and we're going to talk about some of the things that happened obviously on August 8th. But we want to start with what's going on currently, where things are at right now. Let's talk about the displacement of a lot of the residents and just finding adequate housing, as that continues to be something that many are concerned about. We're hearing stories of those individuals who are having to move from shelter to hotels and finding this stable housing. At this point in time right now, what can you tell us about those services that are being provided and your overall comfortability and the way that you think things are being managed with finding adequate housing for these individuals?
Sure, thank you. So there are about 6,800 individuals in 36 of our hotels throughout Maui County. That number's down a bit as people have started to transition from non-congregate sheltering into rental units, host families, which is a program we just announced with the help of CNHA and Hawaii Community Foundation, as well as the Red Cross. So we do have people that were at one time in our shelters that have gone within 7 to 10 days were in our hotels. And we're fortunate that we had that inventory of hotels able to take them. I think we can all agree the hotels were a better situation than staying in a gymnasium or a community center. And then, of course, we have the interim transition housing piece that we're working on now between the state, the county, and some of our federal partners. We are in the process of setting up several programs. The host families is the one that we've been promoting. And what I'm really happy about in this program is it can happen in any county, any of the 4 counties. So if you're a family that will take in an impacted family, we will pay you $375 per person, up to 4 people, or up to $1,500. And what we'll do with that is use that, pay it directly to the host families. All the other programs, they pay them to the actual, the impacted persons. And we know that in Hawaii, a lot of people are already doing this. They're already taking in family members. They put a strain on them perhaps, or the family there feels badly about, staying, so we can provide monies so that we can encourage this. Right now, according to CNHA, we have over 540 households that have accepted this program with over 1,500 people already involved. So we want to encourage this, get people out of the hotels into staying with families. The ideal thing about this is it's already existing inventory. We're not having to build someplace for folks to go to. Again, it's something that sort of organically happens already here in Hawaii, and it's a program that can happen throughout the state of Hawaii. So we encourage people to do that. Of course, there's the Airbnb program that was announced by D-Bed and Jimmy Tokioka and those folks. That's still actively being pursued. We have Global Empowerment Mission offering rent abatement. We have FEMA offering rental assistance if you can find yourself a rental unit. So together with the state and our federal partners, we're offering options to our folks who are obviously going through a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, dealing with their housing.
One thing that you said there was really key, which is if you can find rental housing, and a lot of people right now can't. With the October 8th opening, now we're October 17th, so it's been a little over a week. Do you feel like that happened too soon? There are some folks who said that they felt like they were forced out of hotels to make way for incoming visitors. Do you feel like that was a good date that the governor chose?
Well, I know the governor had a lot to consider in reaching his decision. I know what that feels like. On a smaller scale, at the county level, any decision you make is not going to please everyone. So what you try to do is find a balance, find something that can, make the biggest impact for folks. And I'm sure that's what the governor was intending to do. For us at the county level, we are dealing with what's happened. We prepared some videos that went out to visitors and to our kama'aina that we could prepare people for this so we could, I think it was maybe on us to educate our visitor, to let them know not only is there a physical change, but there's been a mental and an emotional change that has happened to our people. And so we just needed to enlighten them, to let them know that. So that's a big push. We've been getting help from the visit industry to get that word out, whether the visitors at the airport or at a hotel. So we are trying to use that in a constructive way. Again, any date picked would have been obviously the first date, and that one did happen, and some people were impacted more than others. We know people need jobs. We understand that. But I think what we're dealing with now is that uncertainty and the anxiety of housing. And we're trying to work with the Red Cross to see if we can improve our system. The Red Cross, to their credit, they've hired about 100 local, mostly Lahaina people, but just local people to work in those hotels to try to interact with our residents to make them feel comfortable and help educate them on how to fill out their forms and how to be eligible for benefits. So there's a lot of work being done, behind the scenes, a lot of work being done just on the ground. So, working with that date, what that did was triggered the visit industry to take whatever steps they needed to take, and from the government side of things, how to keep that a smooth opening if that was going to be the opening date. We, of course, announced the phased opening, which we messaged to our community in those three physical areas. If you know Maui, going from north towards Kaanapali, there were impacted areas and then less impacted areas, which north was less impacted. So Kaanapali, the reason we decided to open that up last was because that's where 6,800 people are staying in 36 hotels.
You'd mentioned at the top when we were talking about some of the housing and all the different programs and options that are made available. And at times what we're hearing is some confusion from residents when you're talking about programs and initiatives that are being started at the county, state, and federal level. And there sometimes seems to be some disconnect or some questions because there just seems to be so much information and a lot of confusion as to what people qualify for and they don't. How are you working to help to create something that is a little easier for people to understand what services are available to them, and how do you manage all the different voices that are involved in this recovery effort?
Yeah, great question. So, alignment is what we seek to have. There are lots of groups, lots of agencies. We have the Disaster Recovery Center set up at the Lahaina Civic Center. We have the Kako'o Resource Center set up at the Maui Mall, sponsored by CNHA. We have information desks at the hotel properties, the larger properties. We've had people go into the hotels. So what we should understand is there are different categories of eligibility that people qualify for. We have some people in the hotels that were not from Lahaina to begin with. We have people from there who were not previously housed before coming out there. The first 2 months, and especially the first 30 days, there were no questions asked. So anyone who showed up at a shelter, or in this case at the hotel, was taken in. You didn't have to show eligibility. But you were told that entire time that you needed to fill out some forms with FEMA, with the Small Business Association, with Red Cross, to determine eligibility. The people who give funding, like say to the Red Cross, they're giving the funds to the victims of the fire. They're not giving the funds to the citizens of Maui. So we make the distinction that if you're the victim of the fire, these funds are intended to go to you. Just like if you were a donor and you would want it to go to a certain location. And so that's why it's very important and incumbent upon us to make sure that we draw those eligibility factors. And that's what was happening, and that caused some confusion. The second thing is if you were an owner of a home versus a renter of a home. Citizenship was also another factor. So there were several things. And we learned early on there were some language barriers. So we had tried to reduce the confusion that you mentioned by bringing people in to try to assist. But just understand that not everybody was in the same category to begin with. And sorting that out is some of the source of confusion. I think it's gone mostly positive, but of course, there are going to be those one-offs that you'll hear about.
Let's talk a little bit about some other things that are happening right now, and that is the cleanup. Tell us a little bit about your environmental concerns and what's happening to all of the debris itself. Will Maui have to build a new landfill to store all of this waste?
Great question again. I'm going to have to distinguish when we talk about debris. So I'm going to separate that into two categories: hazardous waste and then debris, because they're not the same and they're not treated the same. So the EPA is currently on the ground. I think they've made it through about 1,160 properties, of which there may be 15 to 1,700 total to have to go through. So under 2,000. We started off with 3 teams. They're up to 12 teams going through there. They have cultural monitors with them. Very painstaking work. But all of that hazardous material is being shipped out of Hawaii. And that was by agreement from the outset, and that's what they do. That's what the EPA does. So that's the cleanup that we're talking about right now, phase 1. That's just hazard. The fire debris, the ash, that's the Army Corps of Engineers kuleana to take care of that part. And that comes in between another phase, which is happening, which is when the families can return to their properties. There are 82 zones in Lahaina. 29 of them have either been partially opened or fully opened. And so the families are allowed to come through, go through their property. A lot of them are finding keepsakes. That has to happen. And then they're given the opportunity to sign a right of entry. A right of entry signals to the Army Corps of Engineers that they can come in, remove the debris, and take that off their property. No charge, no cost. If they choose to do it on their own, then they don't give right of entry. They'll have to clean it themselves, but they'll have to follow the EPA standards and the Department of Health standards.
They'll have to clean it themselves? How would that actually work?
If they choose not to do this. They can't leave it that way because it's obviously dangerous. So the choice is, because some people may be skilled or qualified in this kind of cleanup, or they have friends or family. It's a choice. The point of it is, on the legal side, you have to give people that choice. Most people choose to allow the Army Corps of Engineers, but they're not required to. What I was getting to is the phases. So once the hazard cleanup is removed away from Hawaii, people come back to their land. Like I said, 29 of the 82 zones are open, or partially opened at least, and then they give a right of entry or not, and then the Army Corps of Engineer comes in. They remove that debris. That debris will remain on Maui.
Well, one of the other things that continue to happen, and we heard, just yesterday, another victim being identified is this whole process of identifying those we have lost due to this wildfire. How much longer do you think that will continue? I mean, do you folks have a list of people who are still unidentified for, and how long do you foresee that process taking before, everyone has been identified, or those just continue to remain on that missing list?
Yeah. So of the 97 that were recovered, I believe they've identified all 97. I just don't know if they notified the last family. So there's identified and then there's notification. The 98th person did not need to be identified. That person passed in the hospital. That's the entire number of people that were recovered. I believe there are 7 that are unaccounted for as of now.
Let's talk a little bit about money. I know this is a tough one. The county facing a $31 million budget shortfall right now. Where do you expect to make up that money? Are you going to go to the legislature? I know you've proposed a myriad of cuts. I guess it's a 2-part question. It's just where should the cuts come from? And secondly, will you go to the legislature to ask for some as well?
Yeah, our most important function is to take care of the needs of our people, to prepare for the long rebuild process that's going to come. So we wouldn't do anything that would impact those two things from happening, providing for those in need or preparing for our long-term recovery. The cuts that you talk about came from our real property relief. Anyone in the burn areas of Kula or Lahaina who it was the time where taxes were due, real property taxes, we waived. If you already paid it, we returned it to you. So we didn't charge anybody for their real property tax that had already paid or that was about to pay. And we did that within the second or third day after the fires. So that was almost $20 million there. If you didn't have water use, we gave you that relief. That was about $5 million that we would have otherwise collected. And then there was sewer, and there was fuel tax, and there were there are about 7 categories that make up that $31 million you're talking about. We have received funds from various groups of agencies, groups and agencies. The legislature, of course, will be one of those folks that we will go to for disaster relief or funds. The federal government has been a big part of that relief for us. So what you learn when you go through something like this is you talk to other communities that have faced this, that have gone through a tragedy like this, to try not to make the same mistakes, to make sure you fill out the forms correctly, to make sure you're asking all the right questions. That's the process we've been going through for the last couple of months. But as far as having funds, of course, we'll go to the state. That is one of the sources. Our county, of course, we'll have to seek some funds. And we have a lot of very generous donors that have come through philanthropic funds, the Hawaii Community Foundation, the Maui United Way, the Council of Native Hawaiian Advancement. Lots of people have put on, I'm going to say the word, legitimate fundraising efforts for our community. We expect that will find its way to where it belongs. So we know we have various sources. But what was more important was that we gave that relief. Now, I should tell you what I also ordered within the first couple of weeks of this is that each of my departments, including the Office of the Mayor, that we all cut our budgets by 5%. And that's what we did across the board, anticipating that $31 million shortfall. And it wasn't throughout, all the branches of county government. It was just the administration, because that's the only part that I control. And we asked all of our folks, without cutting social services, we didn't cut any grants that were given to nonprofit organizations. And this next budget cycle that we're working on, we're going to keep a flat budget. We're not going to cut another 5. We're going to just take the cut we did, pass it on. And of course, we're hoping for relief from other sources, like the federal government, who have given, for the first 60 days, 100% reimbursement for everything that was impacted by these fires, paying for the hotel rooms, paying for the meals that the folks that are staying in the hotels, they're getting 3 meals a day also provided. So a lot of that funds are making their way to the right people.
When you also look at just the economic stability of the island itself, obviously tourism is a big part of it, and we're seeing that decline, and just the unemployment numbers that are also coming by, which will ultimately impact the island's economy as a whole. Also noting how important the TAT now plays into each of their counties' revenue stream. Looking forward in projections, noting that it may take a while for tourism to rebound, and the role that Lahaina played in the overall tourism experience of Maui. How do you begin that process of trying to account for the money that tourism brought in to help to balance your overall budget?
Well, clearly, it won't be substituted, but we have a lot of construction that's going to be happening on Maui. It's already, you're seeing a lot of contractors, local contractors are going to be hired by the Army Corps of Engineers to do the cleanup. That's going to take a while. That's going to be a big job. I think they're expecting about 400,000 cubic yards of waste and debris that needs to be removed. There's going to be rebuilding. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure. We're going to rebuild our buildings, our homes, our businesses, our dwellings. That's going to be money into the economy. That's going to be jobs for people. Yes, it's a shift. On the visit industry side, we're not just talking about hotels and airplanes, and, airfare and rental cars. We're talking about all the businesses. Over 130 eateries were destroyed in Front Street. That's where tourists used to go and eat their meals. So, there's a lot of work in this that we are looking to have to do. But I also think that with the help that we've been receiving, the funding that's going to come in to help with the rebuild, the construction, that's going to take on a big piece of that. I believe our economy, it affects about 15% of the state's economy. So what's going to be happening next week is a team from Hawaii with the Chamber of Commerce, some of the council members from Maui, as well as Honolulu, and other leaders, community leaders, are going to be heading to Washington, D.C. and seeking support from our congressional delegation and getting support to provide funding for the state. So that's not a request just coming out of Maui, although Maui will be part of that team that's going there, but it will be to make a request to understand the impact that Maui has on the state of Hawaii. So we're coming at this from more than one front. It's not all about Maui. We understand our loss impacts the whole state, so that there's going to be a group trying to head that off.
You know, you mentioned the construction boom that you are anticipating. I'm interested to know what you're going to be doing at the county level to help expedite that process. Will
Sure.
you be standing up, adding a lot more people to review permits at the county level? How do you make sure that that process happens as fast as it can? Because we're still looking at years before we can see structures rebuilt.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We can create all the positions we want, but if we don't have the personnel to fill those positions, then we are kind of where we are right now, where every employer is looking for employees right now, I think, across the state still, before this happened. So this is a good segue to talk about the Office of Recovery, which we are setting up. In other disasters, they call it the Office of Disaster Recovery and Resiliency. We just call it the Office of Recovery. On Maui, we cut everything sort of short when we want to do something. But so what we're doing there is we're going to have Office of Permitting that we're going to expedite permits. They did this on Kauai after one of the floods. They've done this in other states. This isn't a new thing. We're just following that. So yeah, we are. If you already had a home that was burnt, we are going to do everything we can to expedite that permit for you. Now, there may have been a code change if it was built in the 30s versus, the building codes now. So there will be some things we need to do to keep it safe, because the whole idea is not just to build back, but to build back safer and stronger. And so the way to do that is to, obviously not cut any corners, but we are going to try to expedite that. To your particular question about how are you going to handle the housing piece of this, yes, we will have to hire more people. We'll have to, because the county still has to go on. And the leaders that are going to make up this Office of Recovery are leaders from my administration that are already directors or deputy directors or executive assistants in the county now. So they're going to have to be taken from their normal job, be put into this new division, if you will, and the rest of the county has to move forward. But our focus is squarely on getting our whole island, Kula and Lahaina, recovered.
You mentioned some of those eateries that were lost, but there are a lot of businesses beyond just eateries and shops in the area of Lahaina. Some who say they likely will not be able to reopen and will have to eventually move on to find another location. But when you're talking about the redevelopment of that area, specifically of Lahaina, what are you telling some of these businesses that are at this point trying to maybe make plans if they should return there? How do you begin that conversation and that process, noting that there is a lot that needs to happen before time, but also knowing that you're going to need some of these businesses to reopen in order for it to become that same community?
Our main focus right now, our number one guiding principle, is we want everyone from Maui to be able to remain on Maui, whether you're a business or a resident, and regardless of ethnicity or background, or if you are somebody that was on Maui before the fires and you want to stay on Maui, we want you. And that's our guiding principle. All of our policies, all of our plans will be focused on that. So, of course, we want our businesses to remain there. What was learned from the COVID era was that the loans, giving people loans, created another hardship, because there are people still paying their COVID loans. So what we have done in tandem with the state and the governor in particular and his folks is offering what we're calling forgivable loans. That's could be slang for grants. And the reason it's a forgivable loan is it depends if you take that money and run or if you take that money and rebuild on Maui. So it could be a forgivable loan. There was $12.5 million that came out earlier. We gave part of that to the MEO, Maui Economic Opportunity, the Maui Development, Economic and Development Board. So we are trying to get that into small businesses to help them get through this period. We know there are other funds that we hope to bring into the state to make that available. We have I mentioned the group that's going to Washington, D.C. There are other partners that are anticipating that very question about how are people going to get through this time now. And part of that is to create forgivable loans for people to hang in there. I think those are some of the programs that we're looking at.
You know, when we talk about all this rebuilding, what strikes me is that there's a lot of talk about how the people from Lahaina need to decide what comes next for that community. Lahaina's not a monolith, right?
Correct.
We get 3 people in a room, we're all going to have differing opinions as to what should happen next. You saw all this contention with the October 8th decision, and that, you know, the governor saying that he had some community meetings, the community saying that he didn't have enough. When you're deciding what should go next, if there should be Front Street the way it was, if there should be, you know, building right up to the seawall, you know, or not, how are you going to, you know, manage these discussions and have them so that people do feel like their voices are being heard?
Which is why we went with 5 instead of 3. Yeah, but you know, the good ideas will come from everywhere. You don't just have to be on the advisory team to have a voice. There are many people who will call me, who will you know, stop you along the way. People have no qualms about letting you know how they feel about things. So there are people speaking up on their behalf, on behalf of their community. I think I said it earlier, whatever policies we need to put in place so that people will remain and want to stay and be able to live back in Lahaina. You know, some of these decisions, our mantra has also been community-led, government-supported, and we have lived that. Of course, we can't get unanimous decisions, sometimes not even consensus. But I think the important part of that process is listening to what people have to say. Whether you agree at the end, you know, at one time in my career, I was a decision maker. I paid to make decisions every day. And so I do understand the process. I do understand in many, many cases, people need to be heard. They want to be heard. But they understand at the end of the day that you make a decision, you make a call, you explain what it is, how you got to that. That's the transparency part that people talk so much about. What does it mean to be transparent? Well, what it means is explaining why you did what you did. That's what that means. So, you know, yeah, you're not just going to get it from 3 people or 5 people, but these 5 people that I have, they represent 5,000 people because each of them have their own groups. And I was trying to be sure not to have them overlap, but come from different parts of either ethnic groups, business, hotel, you know, Kulakaya Puni families, environmental. They were all represented in these groups, in these selections. So we do want to hear. We do want to hear what people think. You know, it's an interesting thing. Before I went and met with the advisory team, I thought I knew what their concerns were until they said to me, we can't go back to work. We don't have childcare. Our childcare home's burnt down. How do I go to work with my child strapped next to me? Nobody would have thought of that. Your reaction tells me that was something like, oh my. So we didn't, you know, we kind of skipped a step, but they were able to give me that. The second thing is they said, when people come back, are we going to be the spectacle? Are we going to be the tourist attraction? We don't want to be that. So that's how that helped and continues to help. So having people from the community. So of these 5 people, 4 of them graduate from Lahaina High School, 3 of them lost their homes, 1 lost a family member. They know what they're talking about.
Okay. Our conversation with the mayor continues in just a moment. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now. We are joined, of course, by Mayor Richard Bissen. Thanks again for joining us. Let's talk about August 8th and some of the things that happened, because there are still a lot of questions about the county's response during that time. I want you to take us back to that day and that evening going into all that happened. What can you tell us about who was in command and who was in control of the EOC during that time, and your role specifically with coordinating with everything that was happening on the ground? Was there a person or was there somebody in the area of Lahaina that was providing these updates to give you folks an account of what was happening during that time?
Can I go to the 7th?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
So we had met on August 7th because Hurricane Dora was coming through. So we had put 2 people assigned to the EOC to sort of be on that watch overnight. So the night before, I left my office after 7 p.m. and I had stopped off there to go check in and thank those folks that I thought, wow, these guys are going to stay overnight for this. I didn't see anybody in there at that time, and then I realized it was going to start at 9. 9 o'clock was the shift. So what happened the next morning, the morning of the 8th, is I received an early morning phone call, text, alert, telling me that a house was on fire in Kula. The reason I was getting a call is they were going to start to evacuate areas of Kula, and they wanted permission to open a shelter. It was at the Hannibal Tavares shelter in Pukalani. So of course I said, yes, let's go do that. There was no question about that. And so I was supposed to have gone to Kula that morning to meet up with a couple of landowners to go over some property, but I had called them to say, I'm not going to be coming in now because I didn't want to be on the highway. Well, I found out that the one person that I was supposed to meet had already taken his truck and his equipment to go and help fight the fire in Kula. So he wasn't going to be available anyway. So I said, okay, so I can see this is starting to ramp up. So I got dressed and I went in. By this time, it would have been maybe 6:30 in the morning, and I had gone into the EOC. And there were folks already gathered, starting to get together. Again, the entire focus at that moment was on Kula. And the fire started spreading. We were getting reports of the wind. The wind that was picking up was more than usual. And also that they were not able to fly the helicopters that we had because of the wind. I think they go to 40 or 45 miles an hour. And if it exceeds that, it's unsafe. So that wasn't an option for us to fight the fire that way. The fire began to spread more and more, went to different parts of upcountry Maui. The way the EOC, I'm going to answer your question in 2 ways. The way the EOC works is under an incident command structure. The incident commander is the battalion chief of the fire department on scene. So the command is run from the scene. It's not run from the EOC. But the EOC is the coordinating agency that gets supplies or whatever it is the people on the ground need. So we're there with other agencies. Can be 40, 50, 60 people in the room at the same time. In our case, there are times where it's swelled to over 100 people in the room, just because different agencies were coming from all across the United States. When CAL FIRE, they came in, there were 67, just their team that came in. Honolulu sent firefighters. People were sending people from all over during those first 2 I'm talking about the 9th, mostly the 8th and the 9th. But back to that morning of the 8th, there were battalion chiefs assigned to fight that fire. There was a fire that broke out in Lahaina at about 6:30 maybe in the morning. That was reported, and then at around 9, that was reported to have been extinguished. So again, the entire day, everybody at the EOC, my managing director, my chief of staff, my director of comms, the focus the whole day was on what was happening in Kula. And there was a fire chief that was in the EOC who was giving us the information we were getting from Kula. The airport fire, which is a state firefighting crew, they came to assist. There were things that were being requested. They needed more air tanks. They were running out of oxygen tanks. I'm calling it oxygen, but the breathing apparatus. And so the airport chief was able to get a lot of those supplies up to them to help us out. We were trying to see if we could get drones up in the air. The wind wasn't allowing that. We were trying to see if we could get the fire trucks from the airport. At one time, they did try to take a truck up to Kula. If you know the difference between an airport fire truck and a non-airport fire truck, the airport fire trucks carry all the water in the truck. They don't hook up to a fire hydrant on the airport, right? They just drive and they have all the water, I don't know how many thousands of gallons. So they were having trouble negotiating the roads up into Kula, trying to use their apparatus. As far as I could remember, it didn't make it all the way up to the fire. So when that happened, the coordination was happening in our EOC, our MEMA administrator was on Oahu. And we were in touch with the Oahu, what they call HAIMA, which runs the whole state, on a video. So we had a video call. So our whole EOC, and they were there because there was a FEMA conference happening. So they got up on a Zoom or Blue Jeans, whatever it was, and we communicated about what was happening. Again, the entire conversation was about Kula. And at that time, we only had one evacuation center run. And that was the monitoring throughout the day until the late afternoon. And that's when the Lahaina fire was reported through the chief that was in the EOC.
And tell us about the rest. So we've gone to the afternoon, but what about the rest of the evening? I know that Herman Andaya, you mentioned the MEMA director, was here on Oahu. Was he involved at all in any of the response? Where were you getting your information from? We
were getting our information from the fire chief because everything we were trying to find out about was happening in the field. The police were also there. The police, there was an assistant chief who was also in the EOC and some of the other officers. But the information, so the decision making we were making was whether or not, or what equipment or what sort of supplies or what assistance we could give them. We talked about everything from sending other fire trucks, sending other units from other stations. They have to maintain a minimum amount in the stations. We have, I think, 10 or 11 fire stations in the county of Maui, and so they have to maintain a certain amount in a district in case, obviously, something happens there. And in this case, it did. It happened in 3 places all at once, because then the flare-up in Kihei also came to pass. And so the Lahaina fires, when that took off, yes, Herman was not back there. So the person who had stayed overnight the night before, back to the 7th at 9 o'clock, was in charge of the EOC until 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, his shift was over, and another one of Herman Andaya's staff became the MEMA representative or person in charge of the MEMA organization until his shift ended. Herman made it back the next morning, the next day.
And when we're talking about the Lahaina fires and all that was happening in that moment going into the night of the 8th, because it started in the afternoon, really took over in the towards the early part of the evening and well into the evening. Were you folks aware of the severity of it? Because there were
not
reports.
entirely.
Yeah. So at what point did you folks recognize just how bad this was?
Well, we recognized it was getting bad with the fire chief giving us information that was happening. So there was another set of another battalion chief, there could have been more than one, at the Lahaina fire. So that person became the incident commander of the Lahaina fire. I should explain it this way. If this were an active shooter incident, then the police chief would have been the incident commander. So the incident commander is dictated by the event. And in this case, because it was a fire, the experts are the fire folks. So the decisions are made in the field by the person in the field, whether it's evacuation, fighting fires, traffic control. I mean, whether they ask for assistance from the police department to assist in evacuating, going door to door. Those decisions are made by the battalion chief in the field.
And going back, sort of building on Ryan's question, at what point do you realize that this is too much, that you're overwhelmed?
For me, that moment would have been when one of the fire units did not call back in.
And when was that?
As far as what time it was, oh gosh, we'd have to look at the record to see what time it was. But the chief had gotten up, and he left the table he was at, and he had walked to one of the other rooms. There are maybe 4 outside rooms in addition to the meeting room we have. So there's a lunchroom, there's an office room, there's other rooms. So he had gone to another room, and I didn't know if it was to be more quiet or what happened. And then I followed him, and that's when he told me that the truck had not reported back.
You know, one of the other things that we're hearing reports of is just the confusion and panic during that time from residents who felt like the roadblocks that had been set up by MPD during those times to help funnel people in a different direction, you know, and many going into Front Street area. Knowing what you know now, do you believe that was the right move to funnel people in? And I know it's difficult because there's an investigation that's continued to go on.
Yeah.
But how do you respond to those who say that, you know, that the roadblocks may have also played a part in some of the pandemonium that existed during that time?
I think everybody in the field were doing their best to save lives. Every single person in there did whatever they did in what they thought was saving a life. You know, this was such a fluid and dynamic situation to know that a road is clear 1 second and then there's a tree on it the next second, or a pole. And they say, well, I thought you told me it was clear, and now it's not clear. And then other places that I know people, there were heroic acts of people during that time. You know, if we're going to ask this question, it's probably going to be at what moment in time, what part, where were we? Because there was so much happening around there, as far as I can tell, what was going on. But I'm confident that everybody had tried their best, whether they were the firefighters, the citizens. There were citizens who were helping each other. Traffic, I don't know that anything was a roadblock as much as it was a sort of I want to say a checkpoint or an area saying, just so you know, this is what's ahead, or you may not want to go this way, you may want to go that way. Those decisions were made in a split second. I think we know a lot more now than we did then. But while it was happening, which is what I think we should judge people's conduct on, is as it was happening, I'm very happy that we have an after-action report being done by the police department, being done by the fire department, and of course by agencies including Congress. And so that's what should happen in some way. This should never happen again. And so we should absolutely find out where all the areas that we can improve in and how that can happen.
Yeah, one of those areas that has received a lot of scrutiny is the decision not to sound those sirens. Herman Andaya in that press conference stood by that decision. We heard the governor saying that he wishes the sirens would have been sounded. Did Mr. Andaya discuss that decision with you before he talked publicly about it in the press conference? And do you agree with that decision?
I wish we had done everything within our power to let people know what was happening. I don't speak for Herman Andaya, and I mean, he is free to state his opinion about what decision was made and whether he supports that decision. That wasn't something we talked about. I'm not sure if he was expecting to be asked that question or not, but that was the answer he gave, and so be that. But if you're asking me, the mayors and the governor, we've met since this has happened, and we've already implemented new policies and responses to that. Now, previous to that, if you talk to someone like Darryl Oliveira, who was a fire chief as well as the head of the civil defense over on the Big Island, he would tell you that in every wildfire he had ever been in, they had never sounded an alarm in his experience. So, past practice being whatever it was, policies that are written, whether people follow them or not, I think what's important now going forward is for people to know that we will do everything we can to make sure that our people are protected.
One of the other frustrations that we heard from many people in the days after was just the amount of time it took maybe to get the support. We knew that there was an outpouring from the state, but just resources were limited for many people who were stuck on that side of the island. Knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently, or talk about maybe the coordination with all these federal partners and state agencies that came in? Do you think that hampered that there some of the efforts to get out there because there was so much happening during that time?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I don't know when is a good time to clear up what actually happened versus what people think happened. So that night, we stood up the Lahaina Civic Center as a shelter in Lahaina. There was no power, no water, no sewer. We set that up. People went there, and then the fire threatened that location. That is our evacuation center. So in the middle of the night, those people were removed from there by bus and cars to go out to Kapalua in an area called the Maui Preparatory Academy. We didn't have any permission to be there. It's a school. It's a private school. The police did what they had to do to get through the property. They eventually found the principal, who came and was happy to open. There were about 700 people, I believe, that had been transported to that school in the middle of the night. They were not set up. There's no Red Cross. There's nobody. We sent two of our folks from the EOC, Josiah Nishita, Zeke Kalua, got into our 2 trucks. They went to Long's. They went to Safeway. They bought every case of water that was there, and they drove it out. So anyway, but they got stopped along the way because the fire jumped the road. So we had to turn them around. And by that time, we were moving people out to Kapalua anyway. They drove out to Kihei Community Center, where we opened our other shelter, until that got threatened by fire, and we shut that shelter. So then they drove it to Maui High School. Maui High School, the principal and the administrator went there and opened the gym, waiting for the Red Cross to come there. The Red Cross was trying to come in over that night on the 8th. They couldn't get a flight out. That principal and his administrator stayed there. 1,100 people came to that night. We sent our parks people there to help them. No Red Cross, no, cots, no nothing. People just said, the principal next morning was cooking the food there for the folks there. So, no, there was a lot of folks. So the next day, we were sending out the Hawaii Food Alliance, Chad Buck. If you interview him, he'll tell you what happened. That was all county. Everything he did was from the county. Our people went with him and took the trucks of food out there that was getting to the hubs that were out there. The gasoline, Josiah Nishita drove out with the only truck on Maui that had a fuel dispenser. There's a lot of gas trucks, but they're not designed to pump from the truck. There was only one. He drove it out. He pumped the gas. Free gas for everybody who was out on that side. These guys aren't wearing county T-shirts. They're not wearing county blazers. They're not like the Red Cross who you can identify. These are our folks. They were out there. And the volunteers that went and stood up those hubs, those are volunteers that the county put together to send out there. Lots of people did a lot of things. You know, the reason you ask the public to have a 3-day supply or a 7-day supply of food is because that's how long it takes government to get to you. So everyone is asked to take precautions to have those things. It's not just for fun or kicks, because that may take that long. It didn't take that long for the supplies that we sent out there. But there were other people. Roads were closed, power was out, water was out. People were coming across the channel, dropping off for their friends and families in Kahana, in the Pili. The first boat that came out there, we connected with Tamar Paulton. We sent supplies out to Fleming's Beach in Kapalua, because one of the things we did was we decided to stand up the Kapalua Bay Hotel as a place for people to come and get supplies, because it was the farthest north away. We didn't know how bad the fire was still, if it was still going to go. We set it up there. We got supplies. We didn't count on the fact that people couldn't get to Kapalua to go get the supplies, which is why we brought it in later to the Lahaina Gateway. But all that stuff was set up by the folks that work in my office.
I can see that this makes you very emotional. Can you tell me a little bit about what's happening?
No, I'm just thinking that at some point we got to tell the full story. And I wasn't expecting to do it today.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, again, going back to that evening, did you end up going home that night? Because I know that my understanding is that your awareness of the fatalities was not until the next morning.
Yeah, nobody knew. The fire was still going on. We hadn't gone to the scene. We didn't have any reports at the hospitals. We had sent people to Queens and Straub that were burn victims. they were alive when they were sent there. I don't know if they were passed, but the next morning, the chief sent a text to me, the chief of police, verifying that there were deaths. And I sent that to the lieutenant governor because he was acting governor. The governor was out of state and he had come home immediately. So there was no sitting on information. We hadn't even put the fires out yet. So I don't know how we would have known who passed until it was verified that there were confirmed deaths. So that happened the next day.
You mentioned the lieutenant governor and the governor being out of state. And since that time, obviously, the governor flew back, cut his trip short, and has been in close contact with you and your county. I just want to know about that relationship with you and the governor and trying to find that balance, knowing that this is ultimately your island that you're in charge of, yet, the governor is in charge of the whole state. How is that dynamic in, maybe things that he thinks should be policy and procedures and your preference for how you want to manage things? How has that been trying to navigate this leadership role?
We're more aligned than not. I've never handled anything like this before. I'm not sure if the governor, I know he was part of the COVID response. So I would say that we meet on a regular basis. Well, all the mayors meet with the governor once a month. But the governor and I have a regular phone call once a week. But we can meet more, we can talk more frequently than that when a significant event occurs. So, when there was an announcement this Sunday by the DOE, we were on the phone at 8 in the morning. And we spoke again the next day. So there can be a time where we'll speak 5 days in a row, and other times we don't. We take each other's calls. We don't hang up on each other. I call him when I need something. He calls me when he needs something. But our policies really aren't that far apart, I don't think. But let me answer your question that I didn't get to. I left at about 3:30 in the morning. All right, I got to bed at 3:30 in the morning on the morning of the 9th, and I got up at 5:30 and came back. So I just got, I don't remember what time I left the EOC. I just remember looking at my alarm because I was setting it, because it usually goes off at 5:15, and when I looked at it, it was 3:30 and I fell asleep. And I got up and I came back. And that's what it was like those first week or so.
And I think we could do another full hour, but unfortunately we're almost out of time. Just final question for you, moving forward, what's your message to the people who are watching today, and how do we make sure that something like this never happens again?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is we focus on our people's needs, right? I think, as I look back on my career, I realize now that I've been put in this situation because what we want to do is provide for those that are in need. We want to protect those that are vulnerable. We don't want people to come in and take advantage of people because they've been hurt and harmed, where they can come in and take their land or take their money or do something to them just because they're in a crisis. We want to provide healing. We want to provide hope for folks. So our focus is, again, I told you at the start of this conversation, is about how do we keep people that want to be there back there, provide stable homes, provide safe, secure homes, provide food security, provide for healthcare, mental health care. I mean, those are all the challenges that we have, and we accept that challenge. But that's what our focus is on now. It's not on those who would try to divide us, but rather on keeping our community together, bringing our community together, protecting those that deserve to be protected.
Maui Mayor Richard Bissen, thank you so much for making the trip and spending your afternoon with us. We appreciate it. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Spotlight now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalesuji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, great to catch up with Maui Mayor Richard Bissen there. A lot to unpack, so if you missed any part of that, please be sure to go back and watch this interview as the mayor really detailing what happened the night of August 7th and 8th and getting a little emotional there.
Yeah, that was not expected, and I think he didn't expect it out either, but really recounting where he was, saying that he was in the EOC, what sounds like for most of the evening, and he said that the moment for him when he realized that things were really out of control was when one of the fire captains radioed to a truck and did not hear back. You could really see it in his face, just the memory of that moment and just how difficult that must have been.
Yeah, a lot to, we discussed a lot, including how Maui rebuilds and moves forward, including what happens to the debris. So a lot that if you miss, again, please go back. You can also listen to this as a podcast as well. We want to thank Maui Mayor for being here and look forward to seeing you right back here next week, Tuesday, as we leave you now with a beautiful shot of the Honolulu skyline.
Aloha.